Hello again, class. So, I just would like to point out certain aspects of this argument with relation to identity and stereotyping. And then once we're done with this reading review, I'll click on this Dr. Drew video where they analyze the Storm Stalker situation from quite a few fallacious perspectives. So first, though, let's just go over what the argument entails. Are we worried about Storm's identity or our own? Rhetorical question, right? Trying to persuade us about this topic. Americans love to say we're all just people, so why are we so bent out of shape by not knowing a child's gender? Now, what's interesting about this, the essays, the freedom to choose your own pronoun, right? It ain't easy being bisexual on TV, trans women at Smith, right? That we read last week and went over, focused on the ideas of identity from an adult perspective of the person's identity themselves. This is about parents choosing to not share the identity of their child with the child so that the child can choose whether or not the child wants to identify as a gender that either is the same or might be different biologically. Now, for those of you who are writing on this particular topic and maybe using this essay as a springboard, when you Google Storm Stalker, right, you will see that 5 years later, and this is a good source if you're going to explore this idea of gender identity, Storm, right, 5 years later, preschooler on top of the world. Notice that the family picture, everybody's smiling, right? Again, the LGBTQ t-shirt, the rainbows, and as you read, essentially what the parents did worked, right? It kind of recaps all of the different responses. When they ask the child Jazz to explain the difference, Storm's sibling, sex is what is between your legs and gender is what you think of yourself as a person, says Jazz. All three of the Stalker-Witterick children were given a choice of gender identity. The thing that's interesting is that the first two siblings were given a choice but were told their biological identity. Storm was not told Storm's biological identity. They did not want anyone to assume the sex designated by the doctors would match the gender their baby would identify with later. Now, 5.5 years old, Storm confidently says her preferred pronoun is she. Storm, her two siblings and parents spoke to the Star, and it kind of goes on to discuss how the siblings have also chosen their preferred pronouns, the father as well. So again, baby Storm, 5 years later, preschooler on top of the world. So it worked. Now, let's get back to the argument. Essentially, they didn't do anything illegal or wrong, right? So why is everybody so bent out of shape by not knowing a child's gender? I like how it begins with an anecdote, right? Remember, part of your intros, part of your essays, at some point you can bring in invoke your ethos and bring in an anecdote, a personal story, right? That's true, that you either happened to you or you read about or observed. An example. And this particular one is how the children, as they were, entering the classroom, your son is like a sturdy little security guard, and Jessie, she's our mini hostess with the mostest. The story came to mind when I read about Storm, right? Why are we always, right, assigning, right? Because the male child is standing at the door taking the lunch boxes, he's the security guard, and the female child is the hostess with the mostest. The article recaps the public response On The View, Elizabeth Hasselbeck called it a social experiment. Again, logically, I don't think one would call that a social experiment. It seems to be fallacious. It seems to be kind of an equivocation of the word experiment. Others call for the children to be removed by social services. Again, it seems as though there was a extremely overwhelmingly negative response. And again, technically, if you have a problem with this, you could say logically, the really only counter argument is, I think parents should tell their children their biological sex. Okay, fair enough. But from a Rogerian standpoint, some parents may choose to not tell their children their biological sex. Some may choose to. Regardless, I think that's a parent's decision. And I don't think that anyone should really tell or make anyone raise their children a certain way, as long as they're not doing anything that's detrimental to the harm of that child, right? And remember, dogmatism, the tendency to lay down principles as incontrovertibly true without consideration of evidence of the opinions of others. So a lot of these people that say they're 100% wrong and you have to do this, in some ways we could see that dogmatism. So I like this paragraph especially. So, and I think this is a good paragraph that could be applied to, in some ways, many arguments about identity and gender. Where, however, there is ambiguity, a switch gets flipped. Notice the topic sentence in the body paragraph, and now the details, the examples, the quotes. Just like in your body paragraphs, you make your point in the topic or topic sentences, and then you introduce the evidence to support, right? The details, the facts, the examples, the quotes, the things that you're integrating, right, as part of the support to fulfill your student learning outcomes. What are you? Okay, sorry. If race or ethnicity is all indeterminate, the first question is, what are you? Where gender is not instantly discernible, anxiety or even rage ensues. We want our boxes, our neat cabinets of thought. When crowing over a newborn and asking, is it a boy or a girl, what we're really seeking is the satisfaction to our own eagerness to assign gender. The instant we know, we run out to buy blue rather than pink, or dolls rather than trucks. The pitch of our cooing goes up or down accordingly, right? Gender, ooh, look at the little girl. Hey, look at the little guy. Gender rather than sex is a social response embedded in our language, culture, education, ideology, and vision. When my son and his friend Jesse went through exactly the same motions, it was gender assignment that led their teacher to describe them in such unconsciously distinct ways, and in some, right, stereotypical ways. Ideologies, visions, educations, language, culture. These are all clear examples that you too could focus on when you're looking at different types of stereotyping with relation to identity. Our anxiety, right? Because remember, this idea of anxiety or rage even ensues. And we're going to get to that in the next video. I'll take a break after this one. But in the next one, wait, I mean, I can't wait to play this for you. Where do you see all the fallacious appeals, right? And the fallacious arguments. And these are like doctors. These are people that are supposed to have an ethos. Anyway, continue. Our anxiety reveals a tension in our culture between the insistence on pinning down unknown aspects of another's identity and the assumption that we don't need to know anything about anyone except that they're human. That's a really interesting point, right? Indeed, if there is a social experiment being done, it surely also tests those of us beyond the Witterick-Stalker household, spoken or unspoken. Assigning identity is something we are always doing. In fact, we need to do so to order our world. Yet we almost always do so without giving one whit of thought to all the underlying histories of assortment we imply. Perhaps taking the occasional time out to review is not a bad thing. Now, I could not help when I read this phrase, the underlying histories of assortment we imply. When I was in grad school, right, one of the books that I read was In Search of Our Mother's Gardens by Alice Walker. And essentially, it's looking at identity from the perspective of race and gender and discrimination and stereotypes. And there was a phrase that I couldn't help when this essay says the underlying histories of assortment, right? She has this phrase at one point where she's looking back on racist assumptions as she's looking at an antebellum home in the South, and she says, history is caught. And I think that's a really interesting, and if you want to look forward more, In Search of Our Mother's Gardens on page 47, Womanist Prose by Alice Walker. History is caught. And I think that in our society and culture, when we realize, kind of go back, that our languages, our cultures, our education, our ideologies, and our visions are biased, are racist, are sexist, are discriminatory, are stereotypical, right? From a logical, critical thinking standpoint, hopefully we change those aspects of language, culture, education, ideology, vision, institutions. And we've seen that recently with the legalization of same-sex marriage, with women's reproductive rights. Again, I think that that phrase, history is caught, especially now as we deal with systemic racism and Black Lives Matter and all of the just horrible, horrible things that have been happening, right? Due to racist ideologies, to sexist ideologies, to anti-transgender ideologies. It really, it's sad. Hopefully, when history is caught, we fix it. And that's how we move forward as a society. So part of writing these academic arguments is that you're creating your claims and you're bringing in your carefully structured research in hopes that you can make a point about language, culture, education, ideology, vision, society, right? And we can better understand how to improve the human experience for everyone. So that down to the conclusion, right? So what are we going to do? And so, right, our anxiety reveals a tension in our culture between the insistence, I went over that, sorry. And so we must find some way to speak of this child. If we don't want to call Storm it, and really we don't, we have to call Storm, well, Storm, all the time, no shortcuts, no pronouns, right? And it's interesting because we have the essay, The Freedom to Choose Your Own Pronouns. Now we have an essay also dealing with language. How do we refer to this child, right? No shortcuts. In English, there are no adequately humanizing yet universal pronoun, no general reference to common humanity. In order to speak comfortably, we automatically must yield to the partitions of him, of her, of gender. In the absence of pronouns, address necessarily becomes specific, individual, even intimate. It's a lot different when you call someone by their actual name than when you just call them by a gender. Oh, hey, what's up, guy? Hey, what's up, girl? What's up, dude? Right? As opposed to, oh, hello, Craig. It's more specific and individual. What would it mean if we were forced to hold in abeyance that foundering loss we feel when we encounter the limits of the known? What if we had to just sit for now with the uncertainty that exists beyond the bounds of the normative, the easily colloquial? What if we had to greet one another with such boundary muddling specificity that the hostess in the security guard and the security guard in the hostess were made manifest? Ooh, what a great question to end the essay with. Perhaps we should bring less panic to that moment of liminality and instead hold ourselves open to the wealth of possibilities. I hope you found this lecture interesting, and boy, oh boy, when you hit next and we go to this Toronto couple raising, I mean, just look at gender free. Anyway, I'm excited. I'll stop. See you soon. Thanks for listening and watching.